It's official, the vast majority of current gen GPUs from AMD, Nvidia and Intel are now finally at MSRP, marking an end to one of the longest and most painful periods of GPU price inflation in a long time. But with prices finally down, is it time for celebration, or is it instead worth taking a look at whether the current MSRPs of the current gen GPUs actually represent good value for money in the first place? Let's take a look, because I think we need to talk about it. Now let's start by looking at the state of the GPU market right now. After more than 6 solid months of inflated prices in US retailers, not helped of course by things like the tariffs, GPU prices have been on a steady decline for the last few months straight. Over in much of Europe, the UK included, GPU pricing has been at or even below MSRP for a little while on the vast majority of cards, with Nvidia in particular suffering from what some have described as an oversupply of GPUs in some areas and really competitive pricing as a result. When you look at the Nvidia lineup, pretty much everything, with the exception of the top-end RTX 5090, can be found on or even below its MSRP price point, while all of AMD's lineup, with the exception of the 9070 and 9070 XT, can be found for MSRP. In fact, the 9070 XT has now dropped within 70 USD of MSRP in the US, and for the first time here in the UK, can now be found at the sub £600 price point, albeit with less choice of models than you'll find from Nvidia's competitor cards. That's the lowest pricing I've seen on the 9070 XT since its misleading launch pricing, where only a select number of cards could be found at MSRP prices on launch day. Interestingly, the two cards you'll struggle most to find at MSRP are arguably the two best GPUs from this generation. The RX 9070 XT offers exceptional value at 1440p and 4K gaming, beating out Nvidia's significantly more expensive 5070 Ti, while the RTX 5090 has a lead at the top of its own, with nothing from Nvidia or AMD to compete, basically giving Nvidia a license to charge whatever they want for their flagship GPU. Now this updated pricing allows us to much more easily appraise which GPUs are the best value, and allows us to do so on a cost per frame basis accurately, which is, frankly, immensely useful. Starting with our cost per frame graph on an MSRP basis, and what we see here is the likes of the 9060 XT and 9070 XT massively leading the way. Now if we adjust this to up-to-date pricing based on Newegg as of the 24th of September this year, the 9060 XT holds its top spot in both VRAM variants. The 9070 XT falls down the order slightly, but cards like the 5070 and 5070 Ti both prove to be very expensive for the performance on offer in Black Ops 6 Zombies. Looking at some of the UK pricing based on overclockers on the 24th of September, and we see a fairly similar set of results, with the 9070 XT a little cheaper by comparison. In Hogwarts Legacy at 1440p high rasterization based on launch MSRPs, the 5060 Ti pulls a surprising lead, the 9060 XT once again holds the top spot, and the 5070, 5070 Ti and 5080 are all the most expensive. Adjusting for current pricing doesn't change the order a great deal. We see a bit of a shuffle, but nothing too major. Finally, looking at UK pricing, and here we see again AMD benefits slightly, but cards like the 5070 Ti, 5080 and 9070 XT all look comparatively pretty expensive. So does that mean that these cards are a plain rip-off, or is there simply more to the story? Well, a great bit of data to look at is the historic MSRPs of the GPUs from previous generations. Starting with Nvidia first of all, and to my surprise, we actually see price drop on a gen-on-gen basis on cards like the RTX 5060. It held pricing when compared to the last generation 4060, and actually provided a reduction when compared to the 2060 and 3060 by anywhere from $30 to $50. When you consider high levels of inflation in recent years, this is particularly surprising, but it could also point to Nvidia compensating for what in the last 2 generations has been regarded as a weak product offering. The bigger rises come with cards like the RTX 5070, a GPU which has risen from $379 back when the 1070 launched to a whopping $550 with the current gen. Accounting for US inflation, and it only represents a rise of $40 in real term, but it's undoubtedly still a large increase. GPUs like the 70 Ti show a more dramatic increase. The 5070 Ti, for example, is still sizably more expensive when adjusted for inflation, at a hike of $300 in absolute terms compared to the 1070 Ti, and nearly $200 in real terms. To To think you could buy an 80 tier GPU for under $700 at its 2020 MSRP, with those prices rising to $1,200 on 40 series and then normalizing at $1,000 on 50 series is pretty crazy. Now, of course, lots of these increases have been driven by demand. The crazy sales seen in 2020 and 2021 naturally pushed prices up as companies tried to capitalize on the opportunity that a major shortage of GPUs relative to demand created. And that's why, unfortunately, the 3080's attractive sub $700 MSRP was never really seen. It's also worth noting that real terms pricing has been a lot worse than this MSRP table would suggest, with, as mentioned earlier, lots of the 50 series GPUs taking more than half a year to become available at their MSRPs. Now, AMD aren't a huge amount better with their pricing, and the changes to the way that they position some of their cards and adjust some of their naming schemes makes this data and this table really hard to compare on a like-for-like basis, and frankly gives us lots of gaps to deal with. AMD's outright lack of options with a very small product range that really includes 3 tiers of GPU doesn't help, with their more limited lineup reducing choices not only for consumers but reducing competition crucially for Nvidia on a direct card-by-card basis. The big area too where we've lost GPUs is on the really budget end of the market. Nvidia's cheapest GPU this generation is the 5050 and starts at $249, and for that you just don't get a huge amount of performance. AMD's cheapest card starts at $299, and when you compare this to GPUs from 2016, 2017 for example, we had the 1050 from Nvidia released for just $109, and the 1050 Ti, actually one of my first ever GPUs, launched for just $139. AMD had their RX 550 and 560 at just $79 and $99 respectively, and even their much more capable RX 570 came in for just $169, a long way from the current equivalent's $300 or $350 price tags. And that's of course even when you account for that price inflation. In fact, the GTX 1050 Ti would cost just $180 in today's money, yet we lack anything remotely near this price point. Nvidia's closest is $70 away, and the closest AMD card more than $100. Now, recent reports of Nvidia cutting back on RTX 5060 shipments amid oversupply, and further reports of GPU price drops across the board, especially in China, underline the point that a lot of the budget GPUs from this gen are just not that exciting. While AMD has managed to finally rival Nvidia on the mid-range, and it is finally, they too lack a spark in their lineup with the lack of any true high-end cards that leaves consumers without options. It's also worth mentioning that the ongoing murmurs of RTX 50 series Super, a refresh widely expected to launch at CES in 2026, is only going to dampen demand further. But with pricing back to MSRP on most cards, is now actually the time to buy. Now, speaking honestly, if you're looking for an upgrade and you've been waiting, I'd say that for many cards the answer is yes. Cards like the 16GB RX 9060 XT offer up exceptional value for money, with awesome performance for the price and strong amounts of video memory. It is going to cost a lot more in real terms than the budget GPUs we were used to back in the late 2010s, but I just don't think AMD or Nvidia have any appetite for bringing true budget products to market anymore. It's sad, but that's just the truth. Now, the 9060 XT 16GB is the card I would choose every day of the week over the 5060 and both VRAM variants of the 5060 Ti, something which is backed up by not only our performance graphs, but our cost per frame graphs too. At the mid-range, the RTX 5070's recent dive down to or even below MSRP makes it an interesting proposition, especially when compared to the currently more expensive 9070. A GPU I would otherwise be keen to recommend, I should clarify, if not for its unwanted $50 price bump by comparison. On the high end, the RX 9070 XT is now finally good value for money, and while MSRP may seem to be in sight for this GPU, given how much it already undercuts the 5070 Ti by, and now with better performance, I just can't see AMD coming under pressure to hit their own MSRP until Nvidia launched the supercard to potentially improve appetite for the 5070 Ti product. The final card I'd recommend is the RTX 5090. It's now closer to MSRP than ever, and for that does represent a good overall overall package. Of course it's expensive, and it's not going to be for everyone, but it offers up exceptional performance that differentiates it from the RTX 5080 by a much bigger margin than we envisaged at launch. And if you're annoyed at the lack of competition for the 5090, it's AMD whose door you need to raise your concerns truly at. So they're the cards I would buy, and to be honest with you, this kind of constant cycle of waiting is not something I particularly like to endorse. Now, we may see price drops at Black Friday bring things further down, and if you're not desperate, you might want to wait out until the November period to see where things land. But what I would say is that if this is anything like last year, Nvidia and AMD both tried to basically clear out their current stack of cards to make way for new launches. Nvidia are not going to want to drop prices of Super below MSRP when they launch, and high demand at any GPU launch is going to drive prices likely higher than the MSRP price points we're currently seeing. So that then is the state of the GPU market right now. It feels like buying a graphics card is always really complicated, but hopefully I've helped to clear things up even just a little bit. Get subscribed to see more from me. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.